I ran through that corridor as if my body had caught fire. My shoes kept striking the tiles, making that hollow echo that only hospital floors know how to make. The smell of antiseptic clawed at my throat, and the fluorescent lights above me blurred into streaks. My chest burned, my breath came ragged, and all I could think of was my son, Ethan, my only son, my reason for living. They had called just 40 minutes earlier. A calm voice on the other end said the words that ripped the air out of my lungs. Emergency admission. That was all I needed to hear. I didn't even put the lid back on the soup pot. I just ran. Every step toward that room felt like a punishment for every mistake I'd ever made as a mother. My fingers clutched my handbag so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Room 315. That was the number they gave me. The numbers on the plaques were swimming. 309, 311. My eyes were stinging from tears I hadn't even realized were falling. I whispered his name over and over like a prayer between gasps of air. Ethan, just hold on. Mama's coming. But before I could reach the room, a hand grabbed me by the arm. Firm, steady, almost too strong for a hospital worker. I was about to scream when another hand covered my mouth, and a voice hissed into my ear. Hide and don't move. That was all she said. It was a woman's voice, low and urgent, trembling with something that wasn't fear, but purpose. She pushed me toward an open door, room 314, and then disappeared down the hall. I could still smell the faint trace of soap on her gloves. I stood frozen behind the door, my heart hammering. Everything inside me screamed to ignore her and go find my son. But something in the way she said those words, hide and don't move, anchored me to the spot. Maybe it was the tone. Maybe it was the kind of voice that doesn't leave room for questions. So I stayed there, pressed against the cold wall, holding my breath. The room was dim, the air dry and heavy, with the scent of disinfectant and metal. I could hear the rhythmic beeping from monitors in other rooms, and the faint murmur of nurses talking down the hall. My whole body shook. I tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. Only one thought circled my mind again and again. Why would someone tell me to hide? Then I heard it. The sound of footsteps. Two people stopped just outside the next room, Ethan's room. One of them was a woman. I recognized that voice instantly, even through the muffled wall. That soft, sugary tone that always carried a hint of disdain whenever she spoke to me. Sophia, my daughter-in-law, the woman my son had married 7 years ago, the woman who had never liked me and never tried to hide it. Her voice was sweet, too sweet, the kind that leaves a bad taste in your mouth. She was speaking to a man. I didn't recognize his voice. Professional, measured, cold. A lawyer, maybe. Their words crawled through the thin wall like poison. Everything is ready, the man said. The transfer will go through as soon as he signs. If he doesn't wake up, you'll have full access. I stopped breathing. My knees weakened, and I pressed my hand to my chest to keep from gasping. Sophia laughed softly. The old woman is on her way. She'll take forever to get past the guards. We have time. Old woman, that's what she called me. After all these years, after everything I had done for her. The man continued. You'll have control of the accounts, the house, and the company within a week. No traceable link to her either. She's not listed anywhere. And just like that, the words sliced me open. She's not listed anywhere. He was talking about me. I felt the blood rush to my head. I had given everything, my husband's inheritance, my savings, the last bit of security I had left, because I believed in my son. I believed in his marriage, his future. I thought I was helping them build a life, and now they were erasing me. Sophia's voice came again, lower this time, sharper. And if he wakes up, if his condition worsens, or if he doesn't regain full cognitive function, the man said, you can request guardianship. The assets will default to you. If he dies, it all becomes yours automatically. There was a silence that lasted too long. Then she said something that made the room spin. Don't worry, he won't wake up. The air vanished from my lungs. The rest of their words became distant, blurred sounds behind glass. I could only hear that one line echoing inside me, over and over. He won't wake up. I wanted to run out there. I wanted to grab her by the throat and demand she repeat it to my face, but my legs wouldn't move. My whole body was trembling so violently, I had to grab the wall to steady myself. Then I heard the lawyer say something about crushed pills. My stomach turned. Pills. He asked if she was following the dosage correctly. She said she was, that the doctors had no idea, that they thought it was stress, exhaustion, nothing more. She laughed, and that laugh will haunt me until I die. My son, my Ethan, was lying in that room, poisoned day after day by the woman he trusted most. The same woman who kissed him goodbye every morning and posted pictures of their perfect marriage online. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stop the scream that wanted to rip out of me. My eyes burned. My throat felt like it was closing. The air was thick with disbelief. They left after that. I heard the click of her heels fading down the hall, the rustle of papers as the man packed his briefcase, and then silence. For a moment, I thought I might faint. My knees hit the floor. The tiles were freezing against my skin. I stayed like that, crouched in the dark, shaking, trying to understand how the world could crumble so fast. Everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. I had spent years defending that woman to friends, to neighbors, even to my own family. When people said she was cold, I said she was shy. When they said she looked down on me, I said they misunderstood her. I made excuses for her cruelty because she was Ethan's wife, because I thought keeping peace was better than being right. And now the peace had turned into poison. I don't know how long I stayed on that floor. It could have been minutes or a lifetime. My body had gone numb, but my mind kept replaying those voices like a broken record. Every syllable scraped against my skull. When I finally forced myself to stand, the room tilted. The world no longer felt solid. My breath came in short, violent bursts, like my lungs were rejecting the air itself. The hallway was silent again. I could hear the faint humming of the lights overhead, that sterile hum that always makes hospitals feel more like morgues. I wanted to run to Ethan's room, but before I could reach for the handle, the door behind me opened and the same nurse stepped inside. She closed the door quickly, locking it this time. Her face was pale but steady. Her eyes were fierce, the kind of eyes that see what others refuse to see. She looked at me the way soldiers look at survivors. Breathe, she said quietly, though I didn't need to be told. My lungs were already fighting for control. Her name tag read Marina Santos. I burned it into my memory. The first name that didn't make me sick that day. She knelt in front of me, gripping my cold hands with her warm ones. That warmth almost hurt. It reminded me that I was still alive. She told me she had been watching Ethan's case for weeks. His symptoms didn't make sense. Fatigue, bruising, dizziness, internal bleeding that came and went without reason. Every doctor blamed stress, but she had seen this pattern before. Her sister had died this way. A husband had poisoned her slowly, silently, with medication meant for healing. The tremor in her voice when she said sister carved itself into me. She wasn't just doing her job. She was fighting a ghost. She said she had begun recording everything, every strange conversation, every suspicious visit. That morning, she had captured the entire discussion between Sophia and the lawyer on her phone. Every word, every breath, proof carved into digital stone. When she saw me running down the hallway, she realized what was about to happen. If I had walked straight into that room, Sophia would have played the perfect grieving wife, the innocent victim, and I would have been none the wiser. Marina stopped me because she knew the only way to save my son was to make me see. I wanted to thank her, but no sound came out. My throat felt raw from swallowing screams. She squeezed my hands harder. "We still have time," she said. "But not much. The toxins are in his bloodstream. I've already alerted Dr. Reyes in toxicology. He's testing the IV bag now." I could barely hear her over the pounding in my ears. All I could think of was the image of Sophia pouring death into my son's veins while smiling at the nurses. Marina told me what I needed to do. I had to go into that room and pretend I knew nothing, pretend I was just a frantic mother desperate to see her boy, pretend that I believed every lie Sophia was about to tell me. It felt like she was asking me to walk into a burning building and smile, but I nodded. I would do it. I would play whatever role was needed to keep my son alive. When I stepped into Ethan's room, the air felt colder. The machines hissed softly. My boy lay there, his skin ashen, tubes in his arms, his chest rising and falling with mechanical rhythm. Every breath he took was borrowed. And there she was, Sophia. Perfect hair, perfect dress, perfect mask. When she saw me, she stood and pretended to cry. I let her wrap her arms around me. Her perfume, floral and expensive, burned my nose like acid. I forced myself not to recoil. I said all the things a mother should say. I asked the obvious questions. She answered them with practiced grief. She said the doctors thought it was stress. She said she hadn't slept in days. She even dabbed fake tears with a tissue that smelled of perfume instead of salt. I listened, nodding, memorizing every detail, every tremor in her voice, every flicker of calculation in her eyes. When I finally asked if I could be alone with him, she hesitated. I saw suspicion flash across her face, but greed always wins over caution. She left to get coffee. The moment the door closed, I collapsed at his bedside. My hands shook as I brushed his hair back. His forehead was damp, cold. I whispered his name again and again until my voice cracked. I begged him not to give up, not to let her win. I promised him I would fix everything, that I would fight the devil herself if that's what it took. I stayed like that until the door opened again. Marina entered pushing a cart of medication. Her face betrayed nothing. She called me Mrs. Rivera as if we had never met, asked me to follow her because the doctor wanted to speak to me. We walked down the hall to a small consultation room. As soon as she shut the door, the professional mask fell away. "They found it," she said. "Traces of warfarin, a blood thinner in the IV. It's being administered in lethal amounts. Dr. Reyes confirmed tampering." The floor seemed to dissolve beneath me. My mouth went dry. She continued. "The cameras show her entering the room alone 3 times in 24 hours. Twice she touches the IV line. Proof, real proof. My knees wanted to buckle from the weight of it. But then Marina said the one thing that anchored me again. The police are on their way, but we have to keep her here until they arrive. 20 minutes, maybe 30. You have to go back and make sure she doesn't suspect anything." 20 minutes felt like eternity and a heartbeat at once. I asked what if she left. Marina's voice turned steel. Then we lose everything. So I went back. I walked the same hallway that had almost destroyed me and re entered the same room that reeked of betrayal. Sophia was there, sitting by Ethan's bed, scrolling through her phone. When she saw me, she put it away quickly, her face melting back into concern. I sat opposite her. I smiled. I apologized. I told her I had misjudged her. I said all the things she wanted to hear. I told her I was jealous, that I had been afraid of losing my son to another woman. I told her she was the best thing that ever happened to him. Every word was poison that I fed her willingly. She relaxed, little by little. Her shoulders loosened, her smile returned. I saw greed flicker in her eyes when I mentioned helping them buy a bigger house after he recovered. She even squeezed my hand, her nails cold against my skin. If she looked closely, she would have seen that my tears weren't from reconciliation. They were from fury so deep it tasted like blood. The minutes dragged like hours. I watched the clock on the wall tick closer to salvation. 5 minutes, 4, 3, and then the noise started. Footsteps, voices, radios. The air shifted. Before I could turn, the door burst open. Officers, a detective, Marina, and Dr. Reyes flooded the room. Sophia froze. For the first time since I had met her, she didn't have a script. The detective announced who they were and why they were there. The words poisoning, attempted murder, evidence filled the space like thunder. Sophia tried to speak, but her voice cracked. She said it was a mistake, that I was jealous, that the nurse was lying. She said anything that came to her empty head, but every word dug her hole deeper. When they played the recording, her face drained of color. Her own voice filled the room, cold and careless, bragging about pills and IV bags and easy money. That was the sound of evil unmasked. I stood. My body moved on instinct. I looked her in the eye and said nothing at first. Just let the silence burn. Then I whispered, low but clear. You tried to kill my son. You fed him death with your own hands. The detective began reading her rights, but I barely heard it. All I could hear was my heartbeat, slow and heavy, like drums of war. When they handcuffed her, she spat words meant to wound. She said he'd never believe me, that when he woke up, she'd twist the story, make me the villain. I didn't even blink. He will believe the truth, I said, because the truth is all that's left of me. They took her away screaming. Her voice faded down the hall until it became just another hospital echo. And then it was over, or at least that part was. The strength that had kept me standing evaporated. My legs gave out, and Marina caught me before I hit the floor. She whispered that Ethan had a good chance now, that the doctors were starting the antidote, that he would live. But all I could do was cry. Not graceful tears, ugly shaking sobs that tore through my chest. Anger, relief, pain, all spilling out together until there was nothing left but exhaustion. I had faced the devil, and she wore perfume. I sat by my son's bed the rest of the night, watching the machines, counting each rise of his chest. Each one was a promise. I told him silently that I had kept my word, that no one would hurt him again, that his mother, his foolish, trusting, relentless mother, had finally learned how to fight. I did not sleep. I watched the numbers rise and fall, the soft green lines writing my son's heartbeat across the screen like a fragile signature that could vanish with one wrong breath. I counted drips sliding down the IV tubing and fought the urge to rip the plastic from his arm, as if I could pull the poison back out the way it went in. Rage kept me awake better than coffee ever could. rage, and the memory of perfume that had turned to acid in my nose. I told myself over and over that I would not let sleep steal even a second from him. I had already lost too much time to lies. I would not lose any more to fatigue. They began the antidote, words I never wanted to learn, but now carried like weapons. Vitamin infusions, plasma, monitoring intervals, clotting times. I held on to each term as if vocabulary itself could keep him alive. Nurses came and went, with faces trained to be steady, and I stared at their hands to be sure none of them trembled. I sat very still, so I wouldn't scare them with the storm inside me. I thanked them in a voice that sounded borrowed, and every time the door closed, I pressed my palm to Ethan's chest just to feel the rise. My hand became a metronome for hope. When dawn bled into the blinds, I felt the first thin strand of relief tug against the knot in my stomach. I let my eyes close for seconds at a time, always jerking awake to make sure the room had not rearranged itself into a nightmare with an empty bed. Light made everything look less haunted, but it did not erase the stains inside me. Morning does not wash away the truth. It only shows you where to scrub. They told me the levels were improving. They showed me charts as if lines could apologize. I nodded at the good news like a disciplined student, and then looked back at my son to translate it into what mattered. More color to his lips, less glassiness in his skin, fewer alarms. I whispered his name until my throat hurt. I told him about the garden behind my building and the tomato plant that took 3 months to yield one stubborn fruit. I told him about burning soup and laughing at myself because the smell made me think of a summer 30 years ago when his father and I ruined dinner and ate toast instead. I told him that even scorched food cannot ruin a night if you eat it with someone who loves you. I told him to come back to the table. Time stretched like a rubber band on the verge of snapping. Somewhere in that stretched hour, his eyelids fluttered. Not a twitch from some machine's rhythm, but a deliberate shiver from the place where intention lives. I froze, afraid that movement would scare the moment away. He did it again, more certain, a slow, heavy lift against the weight of drugs and pain and darkness. His fingers flexed under my palm, the faintest curl, the body's whisper of, I am still here. I cried without sound, tears sliding down to the corners of my mouth, salt waking me from the trance of vigilance. I asked the room for nothing. I asked my son for everything. And then he squeezed my hand with a weak stubbornness that belonged to the boy who once refused to let go of the bicycle until he mastered balance. The room filled and emptied and filled again with people moving competently around our small miracle. I did not care what they said as long as they did not say the one thing I could not survive. They did not say it. They said other things, words like promising and responsive and no deficits apparent, and those words stitched something back together inside me with thread that felt almost like trust. I leaned so close that my hair brushed his cheek, and I let anger step to the side long enough for love to take a breath. When he finally looked at me, really looked, pupils adjusting, confusion clearing, I felt an old ache and a new fury collide. I saw the baby I carried and the man I raised. I saw the cost of my faith and the poverty of my caution. I saw the years I spent explaining away cruelty because I thought harmony was the holiest goal. I wanted to pour everything into his ears at once, the truth, the evidence, the avalanche that had buried our lives, and at the same time, I wanted to keep him in a bubble where nothing hurt and nobody lied. But bubbles are for fish tanks and fairy tales. They are not for mothers who have heard murder plans whispered through hospital walls. I learned how to speak in a new way, sentences steady enough to carry scalpel sharp truths without shredding the person who had to receive them. I talked about symptoms and patterns and recordings and cameras and lab results because anger must travel on rails of facts if it wants to arrive at justice. I did not use her name. Names grant dignity. She had forfeited any name that once suggested beauty. Inside me, she remained a smell and a temperature, and a set of hands doing sacred looking things for profane reasons. Pain in a child's eyes is a portrait that never leaves the hallway of a mother's mind. I watched denial fight with recognition and then lose. I watched the architecture of trust he had built in his marriage implode silently, and I hated how familiar that collapse felt because I had lived inside that same house of make-believe for 7 long years. I hated myself for painting over cracks with good manners. I hated every time I smiled through something that tasted wrong. But hatred could not lift a spoon of broth to his lips, so I set it down when he needed comfort and picked it up when he slept. I fed him tiny spoons of hope and reclaimed the small rituals that poison had tried to steal. Brushing his hair back, cooling a cloth for his forehead, counting the breaths when he drifted, whispering nothing words that meant everything. Sometimes I reached toward the empty chair where a father should have been and told him in my head that I was doing both jobs now, again, still, always. They came to take statements. They came with notepads and the serious calm of people who do difficult work for a living. I gave them the story with the steadiness of a witness and the heat of a mother. I walked them through the corridor, the door, the whispered plot that curled itself like smoke around the numbers on the wall. I did not dramatize. I did not need to. Reality had done all the dramatizing. I spoke and felt the shape of my words stack into something tall enough to cast a shadow over lies. I watched that shadow spread. They told me she was being held. They told me the lawyer's name I had forced myself to memorize was already leaking information in exchange for oxygen. They told me the accounts were frozen, the transfer halted, the signatures blocked by the very bureaucracy she had planned to use as camouflage. I thanked them in the same even tone with which they spoke to me, and then I turned back to my son and let my face soften into something human again. Days are longer in hospitals, measured not by clocks, but by cycles of hope and fear. Morning rounds became daily weather reports for our small planet. Clear skies at noon, a storm at 2, a break in the clouds by 4. I unfolded the little blanket Marina brought me at midnight when the air bit at my arms, and I watched her move through the ward like someone born with a compass in her chest. Gratitude for that woman became a constant hum beneath every other noise in my mind. When people call someone an angel, they usually mean a good person. I mean a fighter with wings. I let my anger teach me, not burn me. It taught me how to listen under the soft music of lies. It taught me to stop apologizing for sensing danger just because danger was dressed in a white dress and good makeup. It taught me that love without boundaries is a buffet for wolves. I promised myself that I would never again call caution unkindness. I promised my son that no one would ever get between us with a smile and a script. He slept while I made vows. But vows spoken over sleeping loved ones still count. The universe heard me. When they finally moved him from the ward with the constant alarms to a quieter floor, I felt like I had been allowed to step off a boat that had tossed me against every edge of my sanity. We walked slow together, his hand gripping my arm while guilt tried to climb onto his back. I watched it and I told it, silently and fiercely, to find another home. Guilt belongs to the guilty. it would not rent a room in my son. Recovery was not a straight road. There were curves where nausea waited and hills where dizziness perched ready to shove. We climbed anyway. He learned how to stand without the room tilting and how to swallow without tasting metal. I learned how to sleep for an hour at a time without dreaming of tubing and syringes. I learned that laughter feels like treason after trauma, and also that laughter is the therapy no insurance covers. The first time he made a small joke about the hospital food, I cried with relief so sudden I had to pretend a cough to hide it. They told us about the trial like they were reciting a calendar, just dates and rooms and names, but those dates were tectonic plates under our lives. Time moved and the ground shifted. I bought a dress that did not apologize for my age and shoes that could carry a woman through a courtroom without wobbling. I stood in the mirror and practiced holding my head the way my mother taught me when I was 12, and someone called me poor. Dignity is a posture you wear under your clothes. I walked into the courtroom with my son's arm in mine and the knowledge that some places are built to hold truth and some to hide it. I prayed to walk out of one and not the other. She sat at a table that made her look smaller, not because the furniture was big, but because guilt shrinks people. The shine had left her hair. The posture that sold kindness now advertised calculation. Even from across that room, I could smell the sourness of losing control. She did not look at me at first. When she did, I met her eyes with the calm hate of a mother who has already won the most important fight, keeping her child alive. Evidence piles up quietly, the way snow makes a road impassable without anyone noticing the exact moment it became too deep. They stacked recordings and images and charts and histories. They stacked patterns from other lives she had plundered. They stacked her searches and signatures and the choreography of her hands on the IV line. Each piece landed with the soft authority of inevitability. You cannot argue with a mountain by calling it a hill. When it was my turn to speak, I did not perform. I told what I saw, what I smelled, what I felt, the hallway, the whisper, the leisure in her voice as she planned my son's exit from his own life. I let my grief place its hand on my shoulder, but did not let it cover my mouth. I let my anger sharpen my memory, but not my tongue. The truth does not need insults. It needs to be told cleanly enough to reflect light. I thought I would crumble under cross-examination, but there is a peculiar steadiness that comes to people who have held death's gaze and refused to blink. Questions that would have made me second-guess myself a year ago could not move me now. You do not unsettle a woman who has sat in the dark counting breaths. I answered without decoration, and I watched the defense grasp at smoke. My son spoke with a voice still healing but clear enough to cut. I watched shame try to climb his throat and then watched him swallow it down. Shame is a parasite. It cannot live without your blood. He described mornings that were rituals of harm disguised as care. He spoke about isolation that was framed as intimacy. I wanted to hold him like he was 5 and scraped his knee. I wanted to clap like he was 18 and crossing a stage. Instead, I sat perfectly still and let pride burn a clean fire in my chest. The verdict landed with the heavy simplicity of a door closing. Years were spoken aloud, and I did not count them. Prison arithmetic cannot refund what it tried to steal. I felt no triumph then, only a release so profound I nearly fell asleep sitting up. Justice is not joy. Justice is oxygen. It lets you breathe enough to discover joy later. Outside that room, cameras tried to turn our survival into a clip. I am not naive about the uses of stories. If my words keep even one pair of hands away from one line of tubing, then exploit me. I stood next to my son and let the world see what poison failed to erase. I named the people who saved him, one with a badge, one with a degree, one with a name tag, and I did not name the one who tried to end him. Let the record show deeds, not grant headlines to hunger. We sold the house that had been used as a lure and a ledger. I put my palm on the kitchen wall before we left and told it thank you for holding laughter in better days and for refusing to hold a ghost when she tried to move in. We found a smaller place for him where the light came in honest and the windows did not know the smell of deceit. I took what remained of my savings and the recovered funds, and I did something I never imagined I would do. I put them to work for strangers who feel like kin because pain makes families out of people who have never met. I learned logistics I did not want to learn, forms and bylaws and intake procedures. And I learned that generosity is a skill you can sharpen until it cuts through red tape. We built a small team that walked people from suspicion to proof to safety. Marina stood at the center like a lighthouse, teaching nurses to trust the alarms inside their bones. We listened to stories that made my hands shake under my chair, and we answered phones at midnight because predators do not keep office hours. On Sundays, my son comes to my apartment with groceries, even when I have already stocked the fridge. He cooks in my kitchen like he used to pretend to cook when he was 3. Only now the soup tastes like redemption and the spices smell like a future. Sometimes he stops stirring and looks at me with eyes that say, I am sorry in 1,000 quiet ways. I answer back without words that I forgive him in 1,000 louder ones. Apology and forgiveness can be fluent without language. I keep the hospital bracelet in my top drawer, not as a relic, but as a tool. When I wake from dreams where the hallway is endless and the door never appears, I open the drawer and touch the plastic and remind myself that doors do appear and corridors do end, and sometimes you get to walk through the right one at the right time because another woman reached out and pulled you toward it. I write her name in my mind every day like prayer beads. Marina. I hope the world pays her back with safety and long mornings and a garden full of stubborn fruit. Anger still lives with me. I do not evict it. I keep it like a watchdog, fed and trained, so it barks when something's wrong and sits when love comes to the door. Pain still visits. I do not shame it into silence. I make it tea and let it sit until it has said what it came to say. Then I walk it out and close the door gently. Survival is not the absence of anger or pain. Survival is learning where to seat them so they do not steal your plate. Sometimes I pass a mirror and I see the woman who sprinted down a corridor with the world collapsing on both sides, and I nod to her. She did not faint. She did not run away. She did not hold her tongue when the moment to speak arrived. She became the wall that stopped a flood. People think heroism looks like capes and headlines. Sometimes it looks like an old coat, a cracked voice, and a refusal to let go of a cold hand. I am not the person I was before. I am not interested in being her again. She is the reason I survived, and she is the reason I almost didn't. I will honor her kindness and dismantle her denial. I will keep her softness and discard her tendency to excuse. I will be the mother who brings food and also the woman who brings fire. I learned that warmth without fire is comfort. Warmth with fire is protection. I will keep both. There are days when the smell of disinfectant can still turn my stomach, when the squeak of rubber soles on tile makes my skin prickle. On those days, I take a bus to the coast and let salt air scour what chemicals cannot reach. I watch waves that do not explain themselves, And I remember that some things crash in order to become something else. I left part of myself in that hospital. I left a smaller part in that courtroom. I picked up something larger on the way out of both places. If I could speak to the woman I used to be, I would not warn her. Warnings only work on people already listening. I would sit with her for a long time and let silence do what words cannot. Then I would tell her one sentence: "Your instincts are not rudeness." I would tell her another: "Love yourself enough to doubt a performance." And a third: "Never apologize for saving a life, even if it is your own." I do not keep her name in my mouth. I keep my son's. I keep Marina's. I keep the names of the women and men who call our little office scared and leave it steady. I keep the name of the detective who answered her phone on a Sunday. I keep the name of the doctor who believed a nurse over a protocol. These names are seeds, and I plant them where cynicism used to grow. Anger taught me to dig. Pain taught me to water. Love taught me to wait. Now I harvest what almost died. Now I stand at my window and watch my son cross the street toward my building with a bag of groceries and a grin he cannot hide, and I feel something I thought I might never feel again. Not happiness. Happiness is too delicate a word for this. I feel solidity. I feel the floor holding. I feel the air in my lungs choosing to stay. I once ran down a hallway believing the world was ending. I was wrong. The world was beginning again, without my permission. It began with a hand on my arm and a whisper to hide. It began with a recording and a chart and a badge. It began with the collapse of a lie and the gasp of a man waking up. It began with the sound of metal closing around wrists and the soft click of a door that would not open again for decades. It began with the worst night of my life and ended with a morning where I could say out loud what I had won. I won my son's life back from a pair of pretty hands. I won my own spine back from the weight of politeness. I won a new way of listening and a new way of believing and a new way of being someone's mother. I did not become cruel. I became clear. I did not become hard. I became honest. I did not become bitter. I became boundaried. And if I burn now, I burn clean, a signal fire on a dark coast, telling other mothers where the rocks are and where the shore begins.